Welcome to Safa Experience Show. I am Safa and this is Sex Unfiltered, Unscripted. I am here to bring sex to the table, to talk about it, to listen to it, and to inspire and support you in rewiring your understanding of sex, rewriting your stories around sex, and recreating your relationship with sex. Hello, welcome to another episode of Safa Experience Show. Today I have Paige Felstead as a guest on this show with you. Paige is a sex, love, and relationship coach, and she's here with us to talk about a very interesting topic: culture, religion, upbringing, and their impact on our relationship with sex. Paige, very welcome to the show. And please tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, what you're up to in the world, and we'll get into the topic of our conversation.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for having me. Like you said, I am very new to this work, but am working as a sex, love, and relationship coach, specifically at this time in women's empowerment and body love specifically. I will expand eventually, but that is kind of my focus at this time. And I was raised in the LDS or Mormon church in a very small conservative town in Utah. I still live in Utah, but no longer participate in the Mormon faith or consider myself conservative either. And I think both of those things, both a conservative and religious upbringing, had a huge impact on me and how I related to sex, both growing up and then as I transitioned into adulthood, as I got married and then divorced and eventually made my way into this work. And I think there is a lot to unpack when you are raised in that purity culture. And it's something I'm very passionate about and something I hope to help future clients with as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's very interesting. And you probably know that I'm coming from an Islamic background, from an Islamic culture. So there are probably similarities in our past, in where we are coming from. And in the sharing circles that I have held with people, this comes up a lot. The background that people are coming from, the religion, the culture, the way that their families have been raised and therefore have raised them. It's basically those are the building blocks of what we get to create our relationship with sex. And again, for me personally, it's very exciting to have you here. And as you said, there is a lot to unpack. And let's start with it. Something you mentioned that already caught my attention. You said purity culture. How do you define purity culture? What is that?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I'm sure there are many different definitions of that, but for me, that is this idea that you should stay pure until marriage, or even, I mean, that like sex is all very hush hush, and it is something that is dirty, and it's something that we don't talk about, and it is it's just like I said, like it's just a level of dirtiness that it's like we don't talk about that, we don't do that, and if you engage in that in any way, then you become dirty, and it's something that is like othered. When I was in church growing up, and I know I'm not the only one that received this lesson, there's different variations of it, but they are young women's teachers would pass around an open stick of gum, and we'd all touch it, and then they'd ask like, who wants to chew this piece of gum, and obviously none of us wanted to chew it after everyone had touched it, and that was like their lesson about like sex. And it's like, hey, well, this is the same thing. Like if everyone's like
Wow.
touched you, so to speak, then like no one's gonna want to like be with you. And that was like saving yourself for marriage. And that's just such a toxic way to look at things. There was a very high profile kidnapping case when I was growing up. I actually think she's about my same age. Her name was Elizabeth Smart. She was kidnapped from her home here in Utah and then raped repeatedly. It was terrible. But she eventually got free, and she has talked repeatedly about this, about how when she was raped, that idea that she had been taught as well of the gum made her be like, well, now I might as well just die because I'm worthless. I'm worthless at this point because I am now that used stick of gum. And I think like obviously it's detrimental to sexual abuse survivors, but also it's just like there's no conversation, and there's no openness about to talk about sex and to talk about pleasure and to talk about any of that. I have three sisters, and we have had conversations now as adults how none of us had any sort of sexual education or other type of sexual conversation from our parents. So we didn't get any of that from our mom, which is really funny now, like to compare the conversations we did or didn't have with our parents. So I learned everything I knew about sex from porn. I stumbled on that when I was younger, back in the early 2000s, when if you accidentally typed one letter wrong in a website, all the porn would pop up. Um, and I think that had a big impact on how I grew up sexually. But a lot of people didn't have that. And so it's just like you grow up, and then you get married, and it's like you have no foundation for any of it, for what sex is or about pleasure. It's just like sex is to make babies, and it's so much more than that.
Wow, that's already a lot that you shared. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know where to start exploring. Like I said, there is so much in it, and what I'm hearing from your sharing is something like what we learn about sex is that it's dirty, it's wrong, it's bad. If you do it, then you're like that chewed gum that no one wants to be with you, that your worth is gone. And then suddenly you are married and then you have to do sex. And it
Yeah.
becomes like very confusing. Like if this is something
Yes.
wrong, why should I have to do it? And it
Yeah.
could be like the base of many relationships not being satisfying or breaking. Like we're raised with a lot of other things. We learn them, or we just have them inherently. Like when a baby is born, a baby can cry. They don't need to learn to cry.
Yeah.
They just cry, or they learn to walk or talk. But we never learn anything about sex, and suddenly it's like boom, dropped on our lap
Yeah.
that okay, go deal with it, and it's bad and it's wrong
Yeah.
and all that, and just good luck, go find your way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as
Yeah.
you
And
said,
there
with
is
a
very much too so like this in Utah. I mean, I know that Utah is not the only place that's like this, but that the sex education that is received in school is very much abstinence only. There's very little, in my opinion, actual like education about sex happening. It's just pretty much like don't do it. Uh, like I said, abstinence only. There's a lot of things that teachers in those situations can't talk about. Like I think they can't um, like mention condoms unless someone like asks about them explicitly. It's like I said, it's that in my opinion purity culture that it's like it's very hush hush. And then like you said, then you get married and it's this expectation. And um, yeah, I remember too specifically, which feels like it's very related when I got married, and I was old for Utah to get married. I was 24 when I got married, which I know seems young for the rest of the world, but for Utah, that's old. And I was already living with my fiance. It's like there was no like illusions about like the fact that like we had already had sex. Like it's not like we were getting married in the Mormon temple, which you have to be like not having sex to get married. They're like none of that was happening. And I remember we wrote our own vows, and I remember there was a part where I was gonna say, like, I promise to be like your friend and partner and lover. And I remember when I got to that part of saying my vows out loud, like I could not say lover. Like I couldn't say it in front of like my family and friends. Like I was like, I can't say it. Like even though like all of these people knew, like we're getting married, like it's fine. I couldn't say lover in front of my family and friends. So, like I left it out of my wedding vows because I was like, I can't say the word lover in front of these people. Like, and that feels like so relevant to like this conversation.
Definitely, definitely. And you know, Paige, we have like we are already talking about it. We have talked about it in our previous conversations in the show about how all this cultural, let's say, the limitations are limiting us in how we relate to sex and how we um, act with sex and in sex. So I would love to hear from you, given all this that we know, how can we make a difference? You know, because we can, I mean, it's quite relevant to sit here and speak the whole time of this episode on the impact of the hush hush culture. And I would love to move past that. Okay, that's there. Now
Yeah,
what? Now what? If like now I'm
yeah,
aware of that. What to do now? Like for people who really want to change that and transform that, what is possible? What is out there?
yeah. I mean, for me, I think like the answer is like the opposite. It's like talking about it. It's being open about it. It is talking about sex, not just in terms of like sex education. I think everybody thinks about in terms of like, how do you prevent pregnancy when it's not wanted? How do you prevent STIs, which is very important. That's like a really important part of sex ed. But I also think an important part of sex education, and not necessarily saying this should or should not be in schools, that's not like a debate we need to have right now, but an important part of sex education should also be the pleasure aspect. Sex is not just for procreation, and that there is this big part of like pleasure for men and women. I think that's another impact of purity culture, is that sex ends up being something more for men than for women. Um, but that there is this whole discussion about pleasure and different ways to have pleasure, and it's just this whole big thing that like doesn't get discussed. And obviously consent is another big thing that I think would need to be discussed, because it's even in the bounds of marriage. I mean, I think we've talked about that, like that, and then you get married, it's like, oh, now I have to do this, and it's like, well, that's not necessarily true. But I think all of those pieces need to be included somehow when you're talking about sex education, and it needs to be an ongoing conversation. I think a lot of people think about, especially when you're talking about like kids, and as you start teaching them about these things, think about like, you have one conversation and then you're done and that's it. And I think it's an ongoing conversation. It starts young and you build up and they learn more as it's age appropriate. And then it's just an ongoing conversation as things progress. And like I said, as it's age appropriate. And then we continue talking about it with our friends and with our family and with whoever it is that you want to talk to about it. Because I think the secrecy of it is what breeds shame and all of those things, the things that make us think, what's wrong with me? Or I'm doing something wrong, or I'm broken. And almost always none of those things are true. There's hundreds of other people or thousands experiencing the same things you are, but no one knows because none of us are talking about it. So I think breaking that silence is the key.
Exactly. That reminds me of mental health, that for a long time it was one of the taboo hush hush topics that no one would talk about. And then slowly it became part of the conversation, and people felt more comfortable realizing that, oh, it's not only me that I'm feeling depressed or I'm feeling anxious or whatever else. There are other people. I used to have a podcast myself about depression, just talking about my experience and
Yeah.
raising awareness, and people sending their stories to me to put on the podcast, and it had a huge impact on the Iranian community. Just seeing it as something normal, like I catch a cold or I break my leg and I can also feel depressed. So the same could apply to sex, and we can just start slowly speaking about it, and as you said, normalizing whatever feelings or thoughts or stories we have around it, and together exploring what is possible and what can be different.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think that's true. And I think too, a big part of that, it seems to me that even as like open and like, I feel like sex is becoming in some places less taboo than it has been, but I still feel like talking about like self pleasure or masturbation, whatever you want to call it, is still very, I don't know, that still feels like it's like, oh, that's weird. Why am I like, I think that is like the foundation of a person's like sexual experience and sexuality. And I think that's where everything starts. And being able to talk more about that and encourage people to have healthy self pleasure practices and explore their own bodies and know what they like and what they don't like, and that can change over time, and really be attuned to themselves and their own sexuality is a huge part of the conversation that I think is missing. And um, I think that's just so important. And like I said, like sex, yes, in conversation with having it with other people, but also in having it with ourselves is
Mm.
so important.
So let's bring it to this conversation and tell us more about it.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I mean, I think as teenagers, that's something most people do, and it's just like, oh, why are you doing that? And um, so for me, that was like something that was just very like, you didn't tell anyone that's what was happening, and it was very like hush hush, and for the usual for the culture I grew up in. But for me, after I got divorced and started my training as a um, sex love and relationship coach, that was a big part of our like training and stuff was working through a lot of these practices we may or may not lead clients through eventually. And it was very transformational for me to go through these self pleasure practices and to incorporate that into my routine on a daily basis. It was a deeper like self love than I have probably ever had before. And I am a self proclaimed like self love advocate. Like that's something I have been passionate about for a really long time. Like, had you asked me like 5 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, I love myself. I'm like pretty secure in that area. But like this like only deepened that, like deepened my relationship with myself and my body, and like increased all of those things like just exponentially, but also confidence and empowerment, and like all of by tapping into my own like sexuality just like brought out all of these other things that like I wasn't expecting, which is a big part of the reason why those are like my focuses with the sexuality coaching at this time. But like I really think, like I said, as I got divorced, it was a huge part of like my transformation and being able to step into my power and like reclaim like my sexuality as I was getting divorced and really stepping into my own sexuality, which was like an issue during my marriage. Like that self pleasure practice was just so powerful for me and being able to find myself. I think it's something that's missing in this conversation about sex, enjoying that relationship with yourself. And it doesn't always have to be about orgasm and reaching that, but about really just feeling all the pleasure your body has to offer. And it's very cool and very powerful.
Yeah, one of the topics in this movement that we are part of is just expanding the definition of sex, expanding it from just the act of intercourse into what else could be sex and um, how diverse could it be. Um, Now that you're mentioning this, is there a practice? Is there something simple that you could share, or a resource that people can go to start, if someone is interested, to start this self pleasure uh, part of sex?
Yeah, I mean, something simple, which is even before you get to like the actual sex part, is something I learned is to do like a strip tease for yourself in the mirror. Like you have to get undressed anyways, but turn on some fun music and perform a strip tease for yourself. It sounds silly, but it is actually, it's one, it's fun. And two, it's like really empowering to like take your clothes off in a sexy way and in a fun way and to do it for no one else but yourself. And then after that, if you're feeling so inclined, you can touch yourself in any way that feels right to you. But to just have fun in the way you get undressed and let it be something fun and sexy just for you, um, and really enjoy your body that way.
Interesting. And what could be the impact if someone does that?
I think it's helpful in a couple different ways. One, I think if you have any sort of body image issues, which I don't know anyone who doesn't, it's really helpful to see your body in a new and fun, different light. It also, I think it helps set kind of a more sexy and playful mood if you are looking to like have a self pleasure session or do something like that. It really helps set the sexy mood, and it also just breaks up the routine of the mundane. So like I said, you have to get undressed anyways, so you might as well bring that level of sexiness and play to it and a little bit of pleasure. You can touch yourself while you're doing it and just make it really fun and pleasurable and like I said, experience the different things your body has to offer. You may even find yourself getting turned on by the striptease you
Self.
perform for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm also assuming if most of the things we're talking about here, and especially if something that we talk about is not familiar to someone, there need to be a degree of openness and curiosity and non-judgment,
For
just to
sure.
test it, just
Yeah.
to see what happens. Yeah, I know it
Yeah.
might sound strange, it might sound uncomfortable. I don't know if I want to do it.
Yeah.
What what do other people think? Although other people don't need to know about it, but we always have that. Oh wow, what if someone
Yes.
sees me doing it? Um, so just to relax and
Yes.
release and see it as a fun game. Again,
Yeah, for sure.
without judgment. Like, I just remember something that I sometimes do when I eat a very delicious food, especially homemade by myself.
Mm.
When I'm done, I start licking the plate. because it's really delicious and I like the sauce on the plate. And every time I think, oh, thanks God I'm alone and no one is going to see me. And there is a sense of silliness in there. And it's just fun. Just think, well, I'm going to do it. So to me, it sounds the same. Something
Yes.
really fun, which you're not used to, and just test it
Yes.
and see
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be so serious. It could definitely be fun and silly and playful, which I think a lot of us are missing that playful aspect in our lives. So it definitely brings that.
Is there anything else, Paige, that you think you really, really would love to share for the few minutes that we have left?
Yeah, I think what you just said about the open-mindedness, I think that applies to everything we've been talking about in terms of sex and sexuality and all of it. I think the more I learn, the more my edges get pressed upon, and I'm like, oh, it's just like every time I think I've been like, oh, yes, I have been liberated from this purity culture box I was raised in. And then every time I think that something new comes up, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And so I think keeping an open mind and just being willing to listen and explore and try new things. And if it's not for you, it's not for you, and that's okay. But you're never going to know unless you try it, or are willing to have a conversation or listen to someone else's point of view. And I think that's just how we continue to grow this, is by keeping an open mind and being willing to explore things we might not have tried in the past and seeing how that can impact us, and really just going in with a open heart and open mind both.
Thank you. Yeah, that resonates so much because actually a lot of my own experience is through being exposed to other people having experiences that I was not used to. And maybe at the beginning it seemed like, whoa. And then it was landing and getting
Yeah.
processed. And then suddenly one day I would find myself experiencing the same thing. Like, oh, is this me experiencing the thing that I was so scared or pushed back by 2 years
Yeah.
ago? So yeah, like many other things, just keeping that open mind and watching without judgment, and not necessarily that if I see that I have to do it, just playing with
Yeah,
the idea, just going one step at a time,
exactly.
and opening that horizon would be
Yeah,
very
for sure.
playful and fun.
Yeah, and it might eventually end up being incredibly transformational for you.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you so much, Paige, for giving us this time and your beautiful presence and
Thank
everything that
you
you
for
shared.
having me.
If people want to find you and connect with you and see what you're up to, where is the best place to find you?
Uh, yeah, the best place for that right now is Instagram. I'm in the middle of updating my website. So Instagram, and my handle is at Paige Marie F. So I can send
I'll
that to
write it
you, and
down
you
in
could,
the yeah in the
yeah,
show notes.
yeah.
And
So
whenever your website is ready, we'll add that also to the show notes that
perfect. Yeah, I'm
people
just
can
right in the middle of updating
connect
it.
with you.
So
Great. And is there anything like any coaching programs, anything that you're offering that if someone is interested, they can
I
join?
don't have an official like coaching package currently, but I am offering one-on-one coaching. If anyone is interested, they can just reach out, and we do a discovery call and find out what works best for them, and we'd go from there. So I don't have like a 10-week package or anything like that at this moment, but anyone that's interested, like I said, could just reach out and we'd go from there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Paige, and
Thank
all the
you.
best.